Thursday, November 24th, 2022. Thanksgiving. My mother, Karen, leaned over my new oak table, curled a sweet little smile, and whispered, "Family comes first, so hand me the keys." Within 2 weeks, I had lost my peace, my privacy, and almost my home. I am Emma, 31, a software engineer in Austin, and they thought their plan had worked. If you have ever been blindsided by family greed, drop your city in the comments right now. Subscribe to catch the quiet twist you will not see coming, because that night, I learned a rule. I wish I had known years earlier, love without respect is just control in a nicer outfit. 17 attempts were captured on camera, including one successful entry I would shut down with a rekey, and I will explain exactly how I caught them. But what they did not know was that the doorbell was always watching. Thanksgiving at my place was supposed to be small, gentle, ordinary. I had finally closed on a 3-bedroom cottage in Round Rock, one of those sun-baked streets where the live oaks throw lacework shadows over the sidewalk, and the houses sit close enough to smell your neighbor's barbecue. I roasted a chicken because I could not face battling a turkey alone, set out a little pyramid of store-bought pies, and arranged mustard in 5 kinds, because my father, for reasons no one understands, treats condiments like a personality test. I wanted quiet. I wanted to make a new tradition that did not require apologizing for breathing. Instead, I got a performance. My mother's voice dripped honey over granite when she said the words about the keys. She said it like she was asking for a napkin. Chloe. My younger sister stood beside her, arms crossed over a sweater, the color of money chin tilted as if she were already measuring the crown molding. On her phone, a notification flashed. She did not hide it. That was the first spark that something was off, the way her thumb hovered like she was tracking a delivery. I told myself not to overthink it. I have been the responsible one since childhood, the good soldier who learns to ration feelings, who pays bills before buying candles, who keeps promises long after everyone else has forgotten they made them. Responsible ones are great at talking themselves out of their own instincts. I had saved for years to get here. Early morning code reviews, weekend deployments, secondhand furniture, lunches of peanut butter and apples, a spreadsheet of every coffee I did not buy. When my father's truck died, I covered the repair to keep him commuting. When my mother's crown cracked, I put my emergency fund into her mouth as if it were a wishing well. When Chloe needed a deposit for a lease, I pulled from a side gig and told myself it was temporary. Responsibility elevated to martyrdom is just a scarf you pull tighter until you cannot swallow. That day, as my mother smiled for the keys, the scarf slipped lower. I tried to keep the meal light. I poured iced tea and answered questions about my job that were not really questions. So all that computer work must be easy from home. So your company pays you well enough to manage a place like this. So you do not really need a dining room, do you, since you mostly eat at your desk? I laughed in the way a woman laughs when saying no would set the room on fire. Mark, Chloe's husband, eyed the garage through the kitchen window like it was a parking space he had already claimed in his mind. The kids were with Mark's sister that afternoon, which I had thought was generous. Later, I would understand it was strategic. After dishes, my mother did something she calls tidying, which means rearranging your life while telling you are welcome. She drifted toward the hallway, fingers brushing the new paint, and disappeared into the guest room. I heard a tape measure whisper against the wall. Chloe leaned in my doorway and said almost kindly, "You know Ellie does better near windows. The blue room with the bay would be perfect." I felt my face perform politeness. I said good to know and swallowed a handful of air. Behind her, my father hummed some hymn and pretended not to hear. On the mantel sat the tiniest silver housewarming card from Marcy, the accountant at work, who brings bread to people on bad weeks and slices it for them too, because she knows grief makes your hands clumsy. The card said, "Not everyone thinks you are wrong for wanting boundaries." I used it as a paperweight for the stack of closing documents my realtor had mailed over. Ownership papers, insurance confirmations, a little certificate from the Homeowners Association with my name and only my name. I anchored my gaze there and breathed. A life-saving decision can be very boring, almost invisible. Mine began right then. I would stop narrating my needs to people committed to misunderstanding them. I would start documenting. The ordinary moment cracked open a second time when I walked my parents out. At the door, my mother asked again, sweet as peach tea, "Spare key for emergencies, honey." I smiled and said, "I will think about it," which in our family dialect translates to no. Her lips pressed flat. Chloe muttered, barely moving her mouth, "You always make things harder than they need to be." My father said nothing, which is his favorite way to agree with everything. They left in a drift of perfume and gasoline, the porch light spilling a pale circle on the gravel as their tires crunched away. I stood very still and listened. I promised myself I would change the codes tonight. Then I did something new. I wrote it down. I opened a fresh notebook and titled the first page Boundary Day 1. Under that, a date in careful letters. I wrote what each person had said and how they had said it and where their eyes went when they thought no one was looking. I wrote the sentence about keys in quotes because I had learned from a decade in tech that anything not written down is a rumor. I downloaded the app for my doorbell camera and turned on every notification. I walked through my house with a steady, quiet joy I could not name yet, touching the cool paint in the hallway, the bay window in the blue room, the edge of the counter that would soon hold a loaf of Marcy's bread, and maybe finally a vase of flowers I bought just because. The sky outside was already indigo. The neighborhood was a hush of sprinklers and distant laughter. Ordinary, ordinary, ordinary. But the first data point would land at 2 a.m. I did not sleep much that night. The cottage held a kind of new house hush, the drywall still smelling faintly of paint and promise, and I lay there listening to the air conditioner hum like a distant highway. This is the part YouTube stories rush past the boring scaffolding that holds a person together, but it matters because scaffolding is what keeps a roof from falling when someone you love starts tugging at the beams. My scaffolding looked like color-coded spreadsheets and a habit of paying the bill the day it arrived. It looked like lunches that were peanut butter and apples so I could push a little extra to principal. It looked like me running early morning code reviews in a sweatshirt while Austin yawned awake, then biking past live oaks toward a job that was never glamorous, but was steady, solid, quietly powerful in the way a well-written function is powerful. My friends teased me that I was a human uptime metric dependable to a fault. It is funny how the qualities that get you a mortgage are the same ones that make you a mark for relatives hunting for an easy landing. Years before this house, back in the tiny rental with the rattling windows, I learned the family roles without anyone writing them down. I was the responsible one, the buffer, the child who took notes at the dentist and remembered the follow-up appointment. Chloe was the golden child, the sparkly one who turned heads in the pews on Sunday and made my mother laugh in a way that sounded like clinking ice. My father believed in peace at any price, especially if the price was paid by someone else. When their sedan died on a Wednesday in July, I floated the repair just until payday, which turned into forever. When my mother's crown cracked, I tucked my emergency fund into a manila envelope and called it love. When Chloe's dream apartment demanded a deposit, I split my freelance check and called it sisterhood. I kept receipts because I keep receipts for everything. I never asked for repayment because I had been trained to believe the only repayment that mattered was approval. Saving for the cottage was a series of private bargains. I swapped bar nights for backyard evenings with borrowed lawn chairs. When my company offered overtime during a messy deployment, I took it and kept taking it, telling myself each quiet Saturday would be another inch of equity when I finally found a place with a bay window and a kitchen that fit more than one person at a time. I learned the cadence of escrow and homestead exemptions, the way property taxes arrive like clockwork, the way a homeowners association speaks in polite threats. None of that felt heavy to me. It felt like adulthood, like building a small kingdom where the locks answer to you alone. The fantasy was modest coffee at the counter, a shelf of library books waiting for a weekend Marcy's bread cooling while a jazz playlist dozed in the background. Peace, not luxury. In that fantasy, my family visited, yes, but they knocked first. They did not speak in the plural about rooms that were not theirs. They did not audit my space and find it wanting. The reality, as it turned out, was an audit. My mother praised and pinched at once. "Such a darling cottage," she cooed, and then, "You do not really need a dedicated office, do you, since you are on a laptop anyway?" Chloe's eyes calculated sunlight angles the way I calculate latency. Mark treated the garage like a land claim. I swallowed it because swallowing is cheaper than arguing, and because somewhere deep inside the old programming still waited, keep the peace, keep the peace, keep the peace. Meanwhile, my doorbell camera quietly took in the angles of their faces, capturing the tiny tells, the way Chloe's gaze slid toward the hallway where my purse sat on a chair, the way my mother kept smoothing her blouse as if hiding a thought in the buttons. I did not used to think of myself as someone who needed protection from my own family. My friend Callie once joked that my superpower was patience, but patience without boundaries is just self-abandonment in a nicer dress. Moving into the cottage became my boundary school. First lesson: document everything. When I finished washing dishes that night, I photographed the closing folder with my name on every page and backed it up to 2 separate drives because redundancy is how you keep data safe, and it turns out how you keep sanity safe too. I set a reminder to change the keypad code and turned on every notification the doorbell app offered. It chirped a test notification and then settled into silence. I made tea the cheap grocery store kind with a picture of a hummingbird and watched the steam rise like a little ghost of relief. Before bed, I walked the room slowly, palms hovering over surfaces as if I could memorize the exact temperature of my life. The blue room with the bay window held the late shimmer of streetlights. The guest room smelled like lemon cleaner where my mother had tidied, and the bathroom trash can held a tidy little stack of used tissues that were not mine. Looking back now, the first warning was not the Facebook post I had not yet seen. It was that bathroom visit. My bag had been on the hallway chair for a few minutes while I juggled pans and plates. The zipper was exactly as I left it, but something in me kept replaying the moment my mother's hand brushed the purse strap, in a gesture so casual I would have missed it if not for the new rule thrumming in my bones: pay attention. Love had taught me to look away. Ownership was teaching me to look closer. I crawled into bed around midnight and let the house settle. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once, twice, then gave up. I set my phone face down and tried to meet sleep halfway. When the alert came, it was a tiny sound, a polite ping, the kind of noise most people ignore, because nothing bad ever happens at 2 a.m. on a safe cul-de-sac. The doorbell had detected motion at the front walkway. I will tell you exactly what it saw in a minute. First, you need to understand why my heart did not spike, why I did not rush to the window, why I breathed in and out and reached for the notebook instead. Years of being the responsible one taught me that panic is a luxury. The new me decided information would be my revenge. I wrote the time in careful letters across the top of the page and listened to my house breathe. At 2 a.m. on Friday, November 25th, the polite ping came again, and this time I opened the app. The doorbell's fisheye lens held my front walk in a soft blue wash. Headlights idled at the curb like a held breath. My father's truck, the one I had once paid to repair in a July heat wave, idled with its parking lights bleeding into the live oak leaves. A figure stepped into frame, careful, practiced. My mother. She wore a sweater the color of dry wheat hair, set in its church Sunday curl pattern, and she moved the way people move when they believe they are owed something, not sneaking exactly, but not announcing herself either. She pressed the doorbell and did not wait. Her fingers, small and exact, went to the keypad, hovered, withdrew. Then she tried the handle. The deadbolt held like a vow. I watched from bed as if I had been watching weather. There was an odd relief to the distance, a laboratory feeling. The app stamped the time in tidy letters, and I whispered it aloud as I wrote it into my notebook: 2:07. She leaned toward the glass as if listening to the house breathe. My father's silhouette stayed behind the wheel. I could tell from the angle of his shoulders that he was humming, which is how he avoids giving directions to his own guilt. After a long pause, my mother's head tilted. She mouthed something. I turned the phone sideways to make the frame wider. She said, or I think she said, "We will fix it tomorrow." Then she smoothed the front of her sweater, walked down the steps, with the dignity of a queen leaving a disappointing council, and slipped into the passenger seat. The truck rolled away. Gravel whispered. The cul-de-sac returned to silence. I did not call. I did not text. Panic is a luxury, and I was done paying for luxuries I did not choose. Instead, I added a line to my log. Attempted access failed. Unknown code. Parent presence confirmed. I exported a still frame of her hand on the handle and named it with the date spelled out in full. Then I turned off the screen and let my house exhale. The ceilings ticked as the air conditioner rested. Somewhere, a neighbor's sprinkler coughed to life. I slept not deeply, but with the knowledge that the camera was a witness who never got bored. Friday passed with the brittle brightness of a holiday you did not ask for. I ran an errand, picked up a roll of draft blocker for the back door, and bought a plant I did not need, a pothos with heart-shaped leaves, because it felt important to put something alive on a high shelf and watch it thrive. I kept my purse on my shoulder even while making tea. When my mother texted that afternoon, "We forgot the pie tin, honey, can we swing by?" I answered with a sentence I practiced out loud first. "Today is not a good day. I will bring it Sunday after church." She sent back one word. Fine. The period was a tiny nail. I logged the exchange and watered the pothos. On Saturday, November 26th, I left before noon to meet Marcy for coffee at a strip mall bakery where the owner plays vinyl records of old jazz and pretends not to notice when customers cry a little into their croissants. We talked about sourdough starters and budgets like gentle armor. When I turned onto my street a little after 1, the sky was a Texas blue that looks like it was ironed. My stomach did a careful small turn as I saw the shape of my mother's sedan nosed up against my curb. I felt the old programming try to boot be nice, be small, be grateful, but the newer program ran first. Document. Observe. Do not interrupt yourself. I parked, breathed twice, and climbed the porch steps with my keys in my hand. The door opened easily because the interior thumb turn had been left unlocked. They were already inside. Inside the house held a different temperature. The scent of my mother's perfume braided with lemon cleaner and entitlement. In the hallway, my father stood with his hands in his pockets, as if he were auditing a museum exhibit called Daughter's Life. Chloe's laugh floated from the blue room with the bay window, that bell tone of someone who thinks the world is a mirror. My mother came out of the guest room with a tape measure like a scepter. She started to say hello. I did not return it. "How did you get in?" I asked evenly, and held her gaze so she could watch the question lodge and flower. Her mouth did the smallest twitch, then settled into the smile she uses for pastors and for cashiers she wants to charm into ignoring coupons that have expired. "Oh, honey," she said, "I had a key made yesterday. Emergencies happen. You work so hard. This way I can help." She lifted her hand like it was a blessing. My own hand closed around the notebook I had carried back from coffee, almost without thinking. The page waited. "You took my keys," I said. Not a question, not a scream. A line to anchor the next lines. "You took my keys from my purse in my hallway and copied them. I did not look at my father because he would be wearing the expression called reasonable that always means I should be the unreasonable one for objecting." He coughed. Chloe glanced at me the way people glance at a stalling car on the highway, irritated that I was disrupting her travel. "It is normal," my mother said, and there it was, the family scripture quoted, as if the words themselves could make the act moral. Normal in my family meant traditional when it excused what hurt you, and innovative when it benefited someone else. Families do this. Family helps family. You remember how we helped you through school? She took a half step forward as if to hug me with the lie. We are already measuring to see which room fits the bunk beds. Some piece inside me went very quiet, very still. Quiet is not the same as weak. Quiet is where you can hear the hinges of a plan. I looked past her shoulder to the guest room and saw my throw blanket folded differently, a second stack of towels that were not mine, a plastic bin with a label waiting for a name. I let my eyes return to hers. "You have 2 minutes to leave," I said, voice level, "before I call the police and file a report for unlawful entry." She laughed then, soft, as if at a child performing an adult imitation. "You will cave," Chloe sang from the bay window, not even looking up from her phone. "You always do." I did not answer that. I held up my own phone and captured a 10-second clip of the 3 of them in my hallway. The doorbell had already stored their arrival in the cloud. Evidence first, emotion later. I opened the front door and waited. No one moved. My father started to say something about being reasonable. I repeated the sentence with the minutes shaved to 1. That did it. They left with a gust of offended perfume. On the porch, my mother turned and said almost tender, "We will talk tomorrow." I said, "Not at my house." I shut the door and slid the deadbolt. The sky outside was still a piercing, ridiculous blue. I stood there and shook for exactly 3 breaths, then set my phone on the table and began to write. Time, description, statement. The page filled in neat black lines. I printed the video and placed it behind a plastic sleeve. I made a folder and named it the way my work taught me to name things: clear, precise, retrievable under pressure. Then I opened my laptop and started searching through social media I had not visited in weeks. If my mother had said yesterday like a confession, she did not think I would understand. Chloe had been confessing for longer. 3 weeks earlier, she had already moved in online. The post lived in a bright, braggy corner of the internet where announcements wear sequins. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving on Sunday, November 6th, Chloe had uploaded a carousel of photos my porch with the little brass number I had fallen in love with, my bay window catching late sun like a handful of coins, my kitchen counter with a thrifted vase I had not yet purchased because I was still deciding if it was too much joy. The caption read like a parade: "New season, new space for the kids to thrive." Aunt Emma's cottage will be such a healing home base while we get back on our feet. Underneath it, a friend I barely remembered from youth group asked which bedroom Ellie would get. Chloe replied with a winking heart that it would be the blue room with the bay because sunlight made Ellie's curls behave. Beneath that, my mother's account floated a string of hearts and a line that tasted like an afterthought: "Turned policy family helps family." I felt something in my chest tilt, not quite anger, yet more like the way a picture frame hangs crooked, and your brain cannot stop correcting it. I took screenshots with the timestamp visible, exported the thread as a tidy file, and printed each page with the date spelled out in full. I placed the stack behind a plastic sleeve in binder A, the one I had named Access and Attempts. I wrote the date in my notebook, and then, because patterns matter, I flipped back and noted the doorbell time from the night before. Attempt, announcement, blessing. The sequence felt nauseatingly neat. I scrolled further than I wanted to. There were comments about where to put bunk beds, and whether my tiny hall bath could handle 3 littles and their splash habits. A woman with a profile photo taken at a pumpkin patch tagged Mark and wrote, "Better claim that garage now, man." Mark answered with a picture of beer emoji and the words, "Left side is mine." I do not speak in emojis, and my story would never translate into them, but I understood the language perfectly. Decisions had been made in rooms I never entered. Rage would have been a relief. Instead, I felt a kind of bone-deep stillness, the kind you get when you realize the test you are taking is not the one you studied for, and also the teacher plans to change your answers after you turn the paper in. I put my phone down and set a kettle on. The whistle blew at a polite volume like everything else in my life that week. While the tea steeped, I opened the family text thread where birthdays are announced and potlucks are organized with military precision. I had muted it months ago to stop my phone from buzzing every time my cousin's toddler learned a new animal sound. When I scrolled, a small miracle happened. My father, who treats technology like a suspicious dog, had added my number to a smaller group by mistake. The thread name was a family joke I will not repeat here. What matters is the sentence that lay plain and ordinary after the photo of my front porch: "She will cave." She always does. There it was, no exclamation points, no grand plans spelled out, just the thesis of my childhood. I took a breath, then another, and used my own capabilities the way I use them at work when a deployment misbehaves. Do not react. Snapshot state. I held down the messages, exported the entire thread, and airdropped it to my laptop. I printed it and slid the pages into binder A beside the screenshots from Chloe's post. On a yellow sticky note, I wrote the phrase my therapist once underlined in her notebook so hard the ink bled: "You are allowed to disappoint people who expect you to disappear." Because those expectations rarely live only online, I extended the documentation outward. I enabled United States Postal Service informed delivery, so every envelope headed to my mailbox would show its face first. A preview in United States Postal Service informed delivery showed an envelope from my homeowners association slated for Monday. I took a screenshot and waited. I set up a verbal passcode with my bank and noted in my file that no address changes could proceed without it. I scheduled a locksmith for Monday afternoon, not because I thought my family could get past my deadbolt, but because some part of me needed the ritual of handing a new key to my future self and saying, "This one is yours, keep it." I changed the keypad code, then changed it again for good measure. I ordered a tiny safe that looked like a book because the teenage version of me who hid cash in a shoebox felt seen by the idea. I know this sounds clinical, and in a way it was. When the people who raised you refuse your no, you have to speak in a language the world respects. Paper, policies, logs. I took photos of the current lock cylinders and the code plate and dropped them into a folder labeled Before. I wrote the names of my houseplants on blue painter's tape and affixed them to their pots, not because anyone would steal them, but because labeling the living things I cared for did something to my brain that all the tea in Texas could not. It reminded me I was the one who chose what belonged here. Late that afternoon, the doorbell pinged again. I glanced at the app and saw the mail carrier's uniform filling the frame. He slid envelopes into the box, tapped the lid with the affection of someone who has been on this route long enough to feel proprietary, and walked on. One of the letters wore the return address of my homeowners association. I left it where it belonged in Monday's preview and went back to my kettle. My mother texted to ask about the pie tin again and tacked on a line about stopping by to help me organize. I answered that I had plans and would drop the tin off at church on Sunday. She sent back a thumbs up, which is a disagreeable symbol because it looks like consent while being nothing of the kind. Evening slid across the walls. I stood in the blue room and watched the bay window hold the last light like a bowl of water. Emotion arrived late, as it often does for me, not the hot kind that burns things, the slow, cold kind that sharpens. Looking back now, that was when the suspicion stopped being a buzzing and became a blueprint. I did not know about the folder of 5-bedroom listings yet. I had not heard the voicemail that would make my stomach drop. What landed Monday morning would be the first spark that tried to burn my house down on paper. I will tell you that part next. Dung. Phenom. Sunday dinner at my parents' was an ambush disguised as pot roast. My mother slid a glossy folder across the table, 5-bedroom listings circled in red pen, while my father announced they had already spoken to a banker about moving my mortgage because family needs space. Mark polishing his truck keys like a trophy called dibs on the left side of my garage, and suggested I could park on the street. I kept my voice level, said I was not transferring anything, went home, slept, and on Monday morning, the Homeowners Association email landed accusing me of operating a business. The physical letter arrived that afternoon. I printed the message, stapled the headers, and filed it behind a tab labeled Notices. I matched it to screenshots of Chloe's earlier post that promised my blue room to Ellie, and to the text thread where my father typed the family's favorite prophecy, "She will cave, she always does." I wrote a single line in my notebook, "Pattern confirmed," and then did something only the calm get credit for. I slept. Monday would bring locksmiths and answers, and I intended to meet both with a pen in my hand. Sunday dinner at my parents' was an ambush disguised as pot roast. My mother slid a glossy folder across the table, 5-bedroom listings circled in red pen, while my father announced they had already spoken to a banker about moving my mortgage because family needs space. Mark polishing his truck keys like a trophy called dibs on the left side of my garage, and suggested I could park on the street. I kept my voice level, said I was not transferring anything, and went home to find an email from the Homeowners Association accusing me of operating a business out of my cottage. I printed the message, stapled the headers, and filed it behind a tab labeled Notices. I matched it to screenshots of Chloe's earlier post that promised my blue room to Ellie, and to the text thread where my father typed the family's favorite prophecy, "She will cave, she always does." I wrote a single line in my notebook, "Pattern confirmed," and then did something only the calm get credit for. I slept. Monday would bring locksmiths and answers, and I intended to meet both with a pen in my hand. Monday arrived with a Texas bright sky and the sound of gravel shifting under tires. The doorbell timeline told the story better than any speech-attempted entries at odd hours. Careful hands on my knob, my mother's silhouette framed by porch light, my father humming behind the wheel, even a locksmith's van idling at the curb before leaving. When I phoned and said no permission had been granted, 17 tries in all. I stood in the hall with the printed stills, the air cold against my arms, and let the sensory truth settle the sizzle of cicadas, the smell of lemon cleaner. Someone else had used on my floor the absurd, steady blue of the sky beyond the bay window. The locksmith rekeyed every cylinder while I labeled envelopes new keys and slid a set into a safe that looked like a book because teenage me deserved that wink. Evidence first, emotions later. Quiet revenge is paperwork that bites only when necessary. I called Evan the neighbor with a lawyer's brain and a pastor's calm, and we wrote a cease and desist that was both gentle and iron. Certified mail went to my mother, to my father, to Chloe, to Mark. I froze my credit at all 3 bureaus, set a verbal passcode with my bank, and filed a security report with my building at work so reception would never be surprised on my behalf again. I enabled United States Postal Service informed delivery and watched envelopes appear on my phone before they reached my box. I created Binder A for access attempts and Binder B for financial interference, then tucked a small notebook in my purse for contemporaneous notes because contemporary is Latin for protect yourself. When the Homeowners Association sent a second email asking for proof I was not running a business, I replied with their own bylaws highlighted and copied my realtor. Pastor Williams received a short message. I would welcome conversation but not pressure. My tone stayed level. My pulse stayed low. Revenge, the quiet kind, is choreography you perform in soft shoes. They escalated the way bullies do when their favorite door will not open. My parents showed up at my office lobby claiming Chloe had been in an accident and that I needed to come immediately. Security logged the lie, thanked them, and escorted them out. An hour later, a GoFundMe appeared using my face and my porch, and a caption that read like an elegy for a home I still lived in. I took screenshots, reported the violation, and sent the platform a letter drafted by Evan citing image misuse and fraud. By dusk, the fundraiser was down. Then the voicemail arrived from my father, his voice mottled with righteousness, "We will move in whether you like it or not." I sat very still on the edge of my bed, played it twice, transcribed it to the second, and printed the audio log with date and time spelled out. Proof stacks into a ladder you can climb out on. I put the page into Binder A, smoothed the plastic sleeve, and scheduled one last thing, a family meeting that would not behave like any meeting we had ever had. Thanksgiving came like theater, and I chose my role. I brought pie and silence. After grace, I asked for 5 minutes. I slid the binders onto the table, pressed play on the voicemail, and watched the faces I knew better than my own rearrange themselves when my father's voice threatened my door, in his voice. I laid out the Homeowners Association complaint, and my reply, the doorbell stills with timestamps, the text thread where my collapse had been predicted as policy, the security report from my office, and the takedown notice from the fundraiser. Chloe rolled her eyes and said, "You are so dramatic. You always cave." I looked at her phone-lit face and answered evenly, "Not today." Then, with the same tone I used to end a meeting, I delivered the turn they never saw coming on Monday. My listing goes live. I have accepted a position at the Tucson branch. Showings begin in 1 week. The garage will be someone else's problem by Christmas. I handed copies of my summary to my grandmother and my aunt women, who had taught me to tell the truth, and excused myself from the table. Fallout speaks in failed calls and frantic texts, missed calls stacked like dominoes. Pastor Williams wrote to apologize for the pressure and offered to speak to my parents about consent. The Homeowners Association retracted the complaint after reviewing my documentation. The fundraiser stayed down, and the account tied to Chloe went into review. Mark's swagger wilted. A neighbor he had drafted for sympathy quietly forwarded me the message where he bragged about claiming my garage. I thanked the neighbor and filed it. Meanwhile, my realtor hosted 2 open houses that felt like a parade of ordinary kindness teachers, nurses, a young couple who had saved for years like I did. 1 week later, on the 3rd day of showings, a clean offer came in at $20,000 above asking with a 30-day close and proof of funds that looked like sunlight. I accepted with a thank you that tasted like freedom. Packing a life into boxes is easier when half of it was always invisible labor. I labeled by room and by mood Kitchen Books Relief and donated the couch that held too many awkward conversations to a charity that promised it a gentler future. Marcy arrived with a loaf still warm and a note that said, "Not everyone thinks you are wrong." I tucked it into the last page of Binder A. On closing day, I handed every working key to the buyer and kept only a photograph of the old brass key for my records because ceremony matters, and security does too. I turned off the doorbell notifications, whispered thank you to the bay window for teaching me about light, and drove toward Arizona with my plants seatbelted like small passengers. My mother texted a final volley about betrayal. I replied with 2 sentences, "Do not contact me again without counsel. This is my recorded request." Then I turned the phone face down and watched the road widen. A year later in Tucson, the desert taught me a slower grammar. My job grew into a promotion, my team became the beginnings of a chosen family, and the cottage I rented grew into a small house I could afford on one steady salary without a chorus demanding access. I still keep binders, but now they also hold recipes and concert stubs, and the letter from Pastor Williams about a sermon titled Boundaries and Consent. Sometimes at sunset, I slice bread while a jazz record crackles and think about how revenge can be as quiet as refusing to play your old part. When Chloe's messages arrive, thin apologies wrapped around fresh demands, I let my attorney reply or do not reply at all. When my mother sends a holiday card with the word family underlined, I put it in a folder marked Do Not Rehearse. I look into the camera and tell you this because you might need to hear it. You are allowed to disappoint people who expect you to disappear. If you have ever been pushed to the edge by blood and told to call it love, write one thing you reclaimed this year in the comments. Love without respect is control in a nicer outfit. Mine comes with locks that answer to me.